The beeswax seeps thickly through the cracks of the ducal crypt as the chaplain plunges his fingers into the warm mass, sealing each stone crevice. With precise movements that no longer seem liturgical. 3 nights of scratching, 3 nights of muffled sounds that made the servants cross themselves in the damp corridor of Arnhem Castle. Now silence. Duke Henry of Yorkshire signs the last document of territorial possession at 7 in the morning on a Saturday in November 1371, exactly 9 days, after marrying Catherine of Yorkshire in a ceremony that cost the kingdom the equivalent of 2 years of wheat harvest. The parchment already bore the ducal seal impressed in the wax, dated 3 days before the official death of the bride. It's not despair. It's not madness. It is a legal patrimonial mechanism perfectly calibrated by the feudal gear, where marriage functions as an instrument of territorial annexation and the death of the wife, opportune or provoked, represents only the fulfillment of the asset transfer schedule. The caulked crypt does not hide a crime. It preserves a state secret. Would you have caulked the crypt or demanded witnesses? Leave your opinion, and we continue with the story. To understand how a duchess of royal blood can disappear from the succession records in less than a week, it is necessary to return to the Treaty of Venlo, signed 6 months before the wedding. There, in a room lined with Flemish tapestries, representatives of 2 smaller duchies, Yorkshire to the north, Jülich to the east, negotiated for 17 days the territorial merger that would allow them to resist the expansionist pressure of the Habsburgs. Catherine, the only daughter of the Duke of Jülich, brought as a dowry exactly what Henry needed: 4 merchant cities, 2 toll river routes, and control over 3 strategic bridges on the Rhine. The arranged marriage did not celebrate love, it celebrated logistics. The terms were clear from the beginning. If Catherine died without heirs, the lands would automatically pass to the widower, provided that the marriage had been consummated and registered in the episcopal registry. The clause occupied 7 lines in legal Latin, with terminology that only ducal chancellors and specialized prelates dominated. No one at the Jülich court questioned it. After all, Catherine was 19 years old. Robust health, according to the doctors who examined her before the wedding trip. What could go wrong? The ceremony took place in October, with all the pomp required for weddings between noble houses. 400 guests, 12 days of festivities, a banquet that consumed 80 pigs, 100 geese, and 300 barrels of beer imported from Flanders. Henry was 34 years old, already widowed from a first childless marriage, a man of economical speech and military habits. Catherine had arrived 3 weeks earlier, staying in a separate wing of the castle, accompanied by 16 ladies from Jülich who were to remain with her during the first year, a custom that guaranteed families some control over the well-being of daughters sent to foreign courts. On the 5th day after the ceremony, 6 of these ladies were dismissed under the pretext of cost containment. On the 7th day, another 5 were ordered to return to Jülich to deal with urgent matters that were never specified in the records. 5 women remained, all chosen and paid for by Henry, when Catherine suddenly fell ill on the morning of the 8th day. The symptoms described by the ducal doctors, fever, vomiting, convulsions, coincide exactly with poisoning by belladonna, a common plant in medicinal gardens of the time, and which in controlled doses produced exactly the described progression: initial malaise, sudden aggravation, death in 24 hours. The only recorded treatment: bloodletting and application of cupping glasses, procedures that accelerated death in cases of intoxication. Catherine died on the eve of the 9th day on a Wednesday, without an external confessor and without any of the remaining ladies witnessing the final moment. All were removed from the room under medical order to preserve the environment from miasmas. Henry was present. Only he and the chief physician, a man who 3 weeks later would receive rural property valued at 100 gold florins, an amount equivalent to the salary of 10 years of a master craftsman. The body was prepared in a hurry, no public vigil, no wake open to the local nobility, a mandatory practice for the deaths of women of royal blood, which served as a demonstration of transparency and avoided rumors of murder. The burial took place 20 hours after death on a Sunday afternoon, with only 12 people present, all of them direct employees of the Duchy of Yorkshire. The local bishop, Conrad of Leicester, celebrated a quick mass and authorized immediate burial, dispensing with the usual period of 3 days. Between death and inhumation, 2 days later, Conrad received a donation of a chapel with perpetual annual income. The donation document, curiously, was already drafted and sealed before the funeral, another parchment with a date prior to the events that supposedly motivated it. They only reveal what should never have been visible. Catherine's death had been planned with the same meticulousness as her marriage. But the servants heard 3 consecutive nights, scratches coming from the ducal crypt, muffled sounds that echoed through the stone passages of the basement. In Arnhem Castle, as in every medieval fortress, the crypt was directly below the chapel, accessible by a narrow staircase that ended in an oak door, reinforced with iron. The servants responsible for cleaning the chapel, 4 men and 2 women, all servants without surnames in the records, reported the noises to the chaplain on the morning after the first night. The religious man, a pragmatic man named Gisbert, went down to the crypt, examined the newly closed stone sarcophagus, found nothing visible. He ordered the servants to be silent. It was then that Gisbert sent for beeswax from the ducal apiary, 15 pounds of high-quality wax, normally reserved for special liturgical candles, and important documents. The chaplain spent an entire afternoon caulking every crevice of the crypt, every junction between the stones of the floor and walls, every crack. Around the door, the servants were transferred to other functions in the castle. 2 of them disappeared from the payment records in the following weeks, probably dismissed or sent to distant properties where their tongues would not reach the urban markets. On the day of the funeral, Henry presented 3 fundamental documents to the ducal council: the marriage certificate, the certificate of consummation signed by witnesses of the first night, an invasive but legally necessary custom, and the title of territorial possession that transferred the lands of Jülich to the Duchy of Yorkshire, all papers in order, all seals correct. The council approved the transfer unanimously. 6 councillors voted, 6 agreed. 3 of them received, in the following months, administrative positions in newly annexed cities, posts that brought generous income and considerable local power. It only required that each piece understand its place in the gear and not ask questions whose answers could destabilize the entire power structure. Complicity was systemic, not personal. In the court of Jülich, the news of the death arrived with a 10-day delay, enough time for all the documents to be sealed, registered, and distributed among archives of 3 different cities. He sent messengers, convened an extraordinary meeting, threatened to break commercial treaties. Henry responded with diplomatic coldness, sudden illness, incompetent doctors who did not save the young Duchess, immeasurable pain, deep mourning. He offered compensations, reduction of tolls for merchants from Jülich, preference in contracts for the supply of Flemish wool, even an annual pension for the ladies who had served Catherine. He demanded exhumation and independent examination of the body by doctors from Jülich. The request was officially presented in December 1371. Henry refused based on a religious argument. Profaning the peace of the dead constituted sacrilege. Bishop Conrad conveniently issued a theological opinion agreeing with this position. William appealed to the Archbishop of Cologne, a superior authority in the region. The ecclesiastical process took 8 months. When the exhumation authorization was finally granted, under considerable political pressure, Henry presented a new obstacle. The crypt had been permanently consecrated after the burial and could not be opened without prior desecration, a process that would require a papal commission. The case was sent to Avignon. There, it was lost in the curial bureaucracy among hundreds of other processes. Pope Gregory X never responded officially. The crypt was never opened. The alliance between Yorkshire and Jülich collapsed in less than 12 months. William broke diplomatic relations, withdrew merchants from the cities controlled by Henry, formed a coalition with neighbouring duchies to isolate Yorkshire economically, but the lands had already been transferred. Control over the Rhine bridges was already effective. Henry had achieved his strategic objective: to expand territory, consolidate power, guarantee toll revenues that would sustain his army for decades. The human cost: a 19-year-old girl buried possibly alive, servants silenced, ladies dismissed, documents forged, represented only operational expense within the feudal logic. Wax does not keep secrets. Wax preserves interests. And the ducal interests in 1371 were worth much more than the life of an inconvenient bride. In the Arnhem archives, a single reference to Catherine remained, an accounting entry registering funeral expenses, totaling 23 florins, less than the cost of an average war horse. Her name disappeared from the official succession records. In Henry's subsequent documents, no mention of the first wife. When the Duke remarried 3 years later, this time to a wealthy widow from a Hanseatic city, the official chroniclers wrote that it was his second marriage, erasing Catherine as if she had never existed. The elimination strategy was not only physical, it was archival. Controlling the past meant controlling the present, and controlling the records meant controlling the narrative that would reach future generations. But not all documents could be destroyed. In Jülich, family archives preserved correspondence from Catherine written in the weeks before the wedding. Common letters, accounts of preparations, descriptions of dresses and jewels. In the last letter, dated 2 days before the ceremony, a disturbing detail. Catherine mentions having met Henry's chief physician, a man who seemed to her excessively interested in knowing my eating habits and mealtimes. Odysseum. The observation, innocent at the time, gains sinister contours when read in light of subsequent events. Studying routines, preparing the ground for an intervention that would need to appear natural, sudden, inevitable. Medieval medicine offered perfect tools for discreet murders, abundant poisonous plants, symptoms easily confused with common diseases, treatments that accelerated death instead of preventing it. The case created a dangerous precedent. In the following 20 years, at least 4 nobles in the region died in similar circumstances: arranged marriages, sudden deaths, rapid transfers of property, refusals of exhumation. The pattern was recognizable. But each case remained isolated, treated as an individual tragedy, never connected to the others in a systematic pattern of elimination for patrimonial interest. The fragmentation of archives between duchies, the lack of communication between courts, the loyalty of local officials, everything conspired to prevent the mechanism from being exposed. Each feudal lord governed his territory as an independent fief, and within those borders his word was law. There was no effective higher instance. There was only brute power, disguised as protocol. Henry of Yorkshire ruled for 17 more years after Catherine's death. He consolidated dominions, expanded trade, built alliances, died respected as a competent statesman. His tomb in Arnhem bears an inscription in Latin celebrating wisdom, courage, and Christian devotion. No mention of Catherine. No recognition of the woman whose land sustained half of his reign. When it was finally opened in 1671, during architectural reforms in the castle, 7 stone sarcophagi were found, all empty. The bodies had been Transferred to an unknown location decades before, there was no investigation, there was no scandal. Just a bureaucratic note in the reform records, ancient crypts, empty without identification. The story of Grace became a local legend, whispered in taverns, told on winter nights, never officially confirmed. Some versions say that she appears on new moon nights, scratching at stone doors. Others claim that the wind whistling through the castle towers carries her last breath. But legends are convenient. Legends do not demand justice. The name Grace of Yorkshire survives today only in 3 places: academic genealogies that list arranged marriages of the medieval nobility, historical maps that record territorial transfers of the 14th century, and in the fine print of the documents that Richard signed with wax. Still warm from bees, the wax guarded what the steel imposed. And 9 days proved to be enough time to transform a living duchess into dead property, reduce a marital alliance to territorial annexation, convert promised love into accounted profit. The Middle Ages was not a time of chaotic barbarism. It was a perfectly organized system where each gear knew its role, each official understood his place, each document fulfilled its function. And when a bride became inconvenient, legally valuable dead, politically risky alive, the feudal machine offered an efficient solution: marriage on Monday, burial on Wednesday, possession on Thursday. They only omit details that would stain the wax of official seals. Grace did not disappear, she was erased. And the difference, in an age where parchment was worth more than testimony, was everything.